I've been a little amused over the last couple of days where people have been having these rallies about taxes. You would think they would be saying thank you. That's what you'd think.
President Obama addressing the Tea Party rallies, and I'm not sure he thinks whether you really think that.
Well, and we have Grover Norquist, the anti-tax crusader, on the show today. We're going to ask him if his thank you note is in the mail. Top Line begins right now.
Hello and welcome to ABCNews.com's Top Line. I'm Rick Klein.
And I'm Jonathan Carl.
Every day at noon Eastern Time, we're right here bringing you the latest political news and analysis, everything you need to know before you head out the door to lunch. And it's twitter.com/thenote. If you can't get enough, you need even more. And John, kick us off.
Well, damn money bags. The Democratic National Committee has promised $50 million to support candidates in the congressional races this fall. It's in addition to the money that the various other committees on the Democratic sides will be raising. This, Rick, with Michael Steele's problems over at the RNC, potentially means a big money advantage for Democrats. It may not be enough to stem the losses they're going to see in the fall, almost certainly, but it can't hurt.
And an important message at this time, as the money season really kicks off. We saw President Obama do a couple of big fundraisers down in Florida last night to be able to send the message to their candidates. We're going to be there. We're going to be there to support you and be able to put money where we need to. The quickening. Everyone likes deadlines, and now Harry Reid has one on financial regulatory reform. He says that he expects Senate action next week. And Jonathan, we have seen lots of deadlines fall by the wayside. You almost have to laugh about any deadlines. But this is really bluff calling. This is Democrats saying we don't think that Republicans can stand in the way in this and mount an effective and real filibuster against this. So we want to move this as quickly as possible.
And you see so much more confidence on the side of Democrats here. And I think the reason for that is that they believe there are not just one or two, but maybe a handful of Republicans that they're going to get almost no matter what this thing looks like. So I think that this is bluff calling and a lot more assertive on the Democratic side than we saw last time. Yeah. Next up, Traitor Crist. Charlie Crist, we've talked about in the past on this show, flirting with the possibility of running as an independent down in Florida. Now, since we talked about that on the show last time, his spokesman has said that he is going to run as a Republican. But Rick, you know, the latest news out of Florida is he has just vetoed the education bill that was the top legislative priority of Republicans in Florida and part of the legacy of former Republican governor down there, Jeb Bush. And Crist himself has not talked about whether or not he would opt out of the Republican primary.
And former Senator Connie Mack, who's really a political patron of Charlie Crist, resigned as his campaign co-chairman. And let me just say, I'm glad you had to pronounce that headline because I would have gotten it wrong and gotten in some trouble. And finally, big dogs bark. Bill Clinton today using the 15th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombings to make a rather pointed statement about the possibilities of what he called real consequences of over-the-top political rhetoric. Clearly a reference to the current Tea Party environment, saying you have to be careful about the words that you say when people who may be a little bit unhinged listen to them.
Yeah, and this is the stuff that drives the Tea Party activists nuts. I mean, to have Bill Clinton effectively making the connection between the Oklahoma City bombing and the Tea Party movement is just, I mean, that's fuel on the fire. These people, I was out at the rally for a couple of hours yesterday, out at the rallies, saw Grover Norquist, our next guest, speaking. And the thing that upsets them almost as much as Barack Obama and what the government is doing is when people try to paint them as extremist nutcases.
They don't like the media either, from what I'm told.
Yes,
We're joined now, as John mentioned, by Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform. Of course, it's tax week, but every week is tax week if you're Grover Norquist and you're fighting against it. Let's start with responding to what the president said last night. He's clearly wants some credit for the tax cuts that have been passed. Is it time to thank him?
What he didn't mention were all the tax increases that he passed. I mean, he completely missed all the tax increases in the health care bill. And he misspoke, said something that was not true about his original promise. His original promise, he restated as, I won't raise income taxes. That's not the original promise. You go to our website, atr.org, we have a collection of those original promises. And the most emphatic one, no tax increase of any kind on people earning less than $250,000 a year. There was no, we're just talking about the personal income tax caveat. 16 days into his presidency, he raised taxes on tobacco. Now, there's only one American in the country who earns more than $250,000 a year and smokes cigarettes. His name's Barack Obama. The rest of the people
and he's given up.
The rest of the people he screwed were middle-income people. 16 days in, his promise not to tax middle-income people was a lie. Then he comes back with the health care bill, and we count at least 7, others that are tougher count as many as 12 or 14 taxes that are directed at people earning less than $250,000 to lie.
But look at it for this year.
He lied about lying, and that's unfortunate.
But look at it for this year. Isn't it true with the tax rebate that was in the stimulus, other measures, that taxes are lower this year for the majority of Americans? Isn't Tax Freedom Day this year, not next year, this year, sooner than it was in the previous year?
Yes, that always happens when you put several million people out of work. That's actually a very bad economic sign, that tax revenues fall faster in slow economic growth than incomes do. And so the fact that Tax Freedom Day came sooner is not because taxes are cut, it's because people aren't working and they're not earning as much. So that's a problem he faces. The president also has not spent any time listening to the Tea Party movement. I have, because I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that it showed up as early as it did. I thought, from working at this for 30 years, you'd have to wait until taxes were raised, and then people would get angry and get out and vote and maybe turn elections around. 78, 80, 94, reactions to inflation and tax increases. This time around, all of the activity a year ago and this year, take a look at the signs. They're focused on spending. This is a negative reaction to $1 trillion the stimulus package of $800 billion, the two $350 billion bailout packages, the $1 trillion the Democrats stuck into the budget last year for the next decade. This is a spendaholic spendathon. That's what has people scared and irritated around the country. Wait until the tax increases that the Democrats have passed or endorsed kick in, then you have a revolution. But right now you have a lot of people mad about spending. The president completely misses that because he's too busy calling all these people nasty names.
I want to talk to you about the Tea Party movement.
Which is good for turnout, but not for him.
As you mentioned, a lot of energy out there. No one can turn up their nose at how much people are really engaged right now, or the Tea Party movement. But it's not necessarily to the boon of Republicans, as you know. I mean, we mentioned Florida, where Charlie Crist has a chance of maybe running as an independent because of the Tea Party energy forcing him out. Also in races like Nevada and Kentucky, you've got the Tea Party kind of cutting both ways. Are you seeing a real effort, or what do Republicans need to do to make sure this is channeled in a direction that it means winning elections?
Sure. Americans for Tax Reform, we've worked with groups that set up center-right coalitions, broad coalitions, people concerned about taxes, spending, business people, communities of faith, Second Amendment people, in 46 of the 50 states. And it is the perfect entry point for Tea Party activists who haven't been a Tea Party person is someone who hasn't been active in the last several years, maybe ever, and they got scared by spending. Those people are not voting for Democrats. They may not be excited about a particular Republican, but they're not voting Democrat. And even in the cases you mentioned, there's a phony Tea Party effort in Nevada set up by Reid. That's not going anywhere because everybody knows it. And in Florida, if the Tea Partiers have an effect, it's going to be to help Rubio if Crist were not to run as a Republican. So right now, the Tea Party activists have been a tremendous asset to
You don't think it's going to take away?
movement.
It's going to take away from Republican candidates?
It's going to strengthen. It's going to grow.
Want to ask you about Chairman Michael Steele's leadership. I saw you quoted in an interview just yesterday where you said he can't be a spokesman for the party. There's enough spokesmen. He needs to go back to raising money. Should he just shut up? I mean, is that essentially it?
Well, I think that he thought originally that he was coming in, his job was spokesman. And there have been some party chairmen, particularly when the Democrats were up against Reagan.
Haley Barbour.
Well, Haley Barbour, because he's not completely fluent in English, was not quite the spokesman that you might have thought, although he's a brilliant guy, wonderful strategist. Right. I don't think you saw him going into '94 as the spokesman so much as an organizer and a fundraiser, and he brought the Republicans in the House and Senate together and banged their heads together when necessary. Steele needs to fundraise, organize.
So no more appearances on the Situation Room?
It's not necessary. It's not. There's no value added to that, and sometimes it hurts.
So you tell them to stay off TV.
It's not necessary. If you got an extra hour, call people on the phone to raise money.
Just very briefly back on the tax question. Is it the case, as President Obama says in your judgment, that taxes have gone down for the majority of Americans? Is that an accurate statement when he says that? Not talking about the campaign promises.
Because incomes have fallen.
Because incomes have fallen.
And that's not good.
And nothing to do with the tax cuts that are part of the stimulus.
You had the refundable tax cuts, which are a one-time deal. They're not permanent. And in fact, we don't know what's going to happen to the Bush $500 tax credits into the future. If the Democrats
But
really...
for this year, I mean, he has lowered taxes than most Americans. I mean, you can say they're baked into the cake here, increases. But
some of those things are checks, some of those things are spending. So you really have to disaggregate the welfare spending from real reductions in taxes.
Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform. Happy Tax Week to you, sir.
Absolutely.
How early do you do your taxes?
I was a couple days ahead this time.
A couple days. All right.